50 Shades of Grey is a 2015 film directed by Sam Taylor Johnson. Christian Grey, a 27-year-old handsome billionaire pilot, pianist, and BDSM enthusiast, seduces Anastasia Steele, a shy, naive virgin with the name of a parody romance novel protagonist. Christian stalks and violates the personal space of Anastasia, which she finds seductive, and falls in love with a domineering, insensitive playboy who says he always gets what he wants. In the end, Anastasia decides that this lifestyle is actually not for her and leaves him amidst a sweeping montage that romanticizes their troubling relationship. This movie sucks. From a purely structural standpoint, the biggest problems with 50 Shades of Grey are its embarrassing, inauthentic dialogue, its mediocre cinematography, and its flavorless relationship between the two leads that lacks even the slightest bit of chemistry. The essence of drama is conflict, but in 50 Shades of Grey, there are almost no consequences to what is happening. The conflict, such as it is, circles around whether or not Anastasia Steele will sign a sex contract that is absolutely not legally enforceable, for obvious reasons. The broader conflict is whether or not Anastasia can continue to love Christian despite the fact that they want completely different things from a relationship and are clearly wrong for each other in every conceivable way. So the problem with this conflict is that anyone in the audience with any sense would realize that no, they should not be together. Remaining together would mean that one of them would have to give up their entire sexual identity, and though there is something noble in sacrifice, neither would be even remotely happy in said relationship. What's worse, it is a challenge for anyone in the audience to become invested in the protagonist, Anastasia, considering we know almost nothing about her. Rather than spend time on her backstory or carefully reveal her character before meeting Christian, the movie begins as she makes her way to interview him. It feels almost as if the film were starting in medias res, as some screenplays are designed, and that we would receive flashbacks over the course of the narrative to better understand our protagonist. But no, we're just in it, and we're supposed to care. Anastasia Steele is the worst blank slate character in modern history, which is not too surprising for what is essentially self-insert fanfiction. Now, admittedly, these are just typical bad movie benchmarks. A checklist of passionless filmmaking. I don't want to harp all day on that because it's mostly the harmless kind of bad. There is something far worse about 50 Shades of Grey. The biggest eye roll of the film is its frequent and unceasing ignorance about BDSM that is somehow both laughable and also dangerous.
What are butt plugs?
50 Shades of Grey is woefully misinformed about BDSM, the subject of the film, to the extent that it actually misinforms the audience as well. BDSM actually stands for multiple things within its characters. BD stands for bondage and discipline. But the D is then used for something else, DS, dominant and submissive, and the S combines with M to be sadism and masochism. The terms are lumped together that way because BDSM can be different things to different people with different preferences. Even its terms are more complicated than one might think, but author E.L. James, screenwriter Kelly Marcel, and director Sam Taylor Johnson seem completely in the dark as it relates to the actual ins and outs of BDSM. Firstly, the story portrays Christian Grey, a dominant, as someone who can only be aroused by his unorthodox sexual practice because he was abused as a child. His mother was a crack addict and a prostitute, and Christian had sex with a grown woman when he was underage. He was the victim of statutory rape. This relationship persisted, and Christian is still in contact with her, never thinking of her behavior as wrong. In the real world, an interest in BDSM in someone typically does not have its origins in abuse, and the suggestion falsely casts BDSM itself as abusive. If one watched 50 Shades of Grey, one might assume it is. A dominant is taking on a role in the sexual act, or even the sexual relationship, just as the submissive is. Christian, on the other hand, walks around acting dominant all the time in every aspect of his life, sexual or otherwise, and that's completely unrealistic. First of all, dominant and submissive sexual partners generally know that in spite of the roleplay scenario, it is actually the submissive who has noticeably more power. The submissive controls when everything must slow down or stop. The submissive has more control over the situation than the dominant, partly for reasons of safety. 50 Shades of Grey spends a great deal of time talking about consent, which is probably good in and of itself, but Anastasia never signs the consent form, the sex contract, and Christian never adheres to his own rules anyway. 50 Shades of Grey portrays the dominant role in the BDSM relationship as having all the power, even to the point of abuse and manipulation. Christian stalks Anastasia at work. Their chance encounter at the local hardware store is preposterous. There is no way billionaire Christian Grey does his own shopping, at a small store no less. Christian confesses to this need to see her regardless of her wishes. He says that he will not leave her alone. He shows up in her own home, which I am fairly certain is trespassing. Christian also somehow tracks her down at a local bar. He undresses her without her consent. When she wants to leave, he says that her mouth may be saying no, but her body is saying yes. Those are the words of a sex offender. All of the actions should probably land him in jail in any other movie or, real life.
You're here because I'm incapable of leaving you alone.
Christian's stalking should not be romanticized, nor should his controlling behavior be conflated with his BDSM role as a dominant. Again, a dominant is playing a role that is generally under the auspices of the submissive. Christian's paraphilia, a condition in which one's sexual desires control all other aspects of one's life, should not be seen as exciting, should not be portrayed that way. Most psychological studies say that people in BDSM relationships are very healthy, and that the relationship is one of great communication. This probably makes sense because a dominant-submissive relationship absolutely requires the two people to communicate with each other very explicitly about their needs. They are play partners. 50 Shades of Grey somehow both demonizes dominance and showcases a titillating how-to guide that is ignorant and dangerous. Now, simply because one man who is into BDSM is portrayed as someone who is still suffering from his childhood abuse and stalks women does not necessarily mean that the story is saying everyone who is into BDSM was abused and stalks women. But when he is the only dominant in the film, he becomes the representative of the culture. His portrayal is the only significant window into BDSM in this film, and as such, it is deeply troubling. It casts dominance, and indeed anyone who practices some form of BDSM, as abused and damaged, as if that were the clear genesis of the kink. Now, besides some of the obvious reasons the relationship between Christian and Anastasia is unhealthy and not reflective of actual play partners, let's examine how uneducated 50 Shades of Grey is as it relates to safety. Christian buys cable ties, harsh rope, and duct tape at the hardware store in a scene that I am guessing was meant to be erotic foreshadowing. Dominants generally do not use cable ties and other harsh bindings in their play sessions. They are widely understood in the BDSM community as unsafe. Specifically made BDSM tape is formulated to be both effective and not rip skin or hair off when removed. Basically, silk and nylon bondage rope will not leave your skin irritated and rug burned. I can't show everything due to the nudity, but there is a scene in which Christian whips parts of Anastasia's chest that are dangerously close to the kidneys. That is generally thought of as out of bounds, as it could result in bruising vital organs. Sometimes Anastasia agrees to sex that she's uncomfortable with because she's too shy to speak up or because she's afraid of losing Christian. BDSM requires communication and emotional maturity. Many, if not most, dominant-submissive relationships begin on the internet or after meeting at a fetish event. Two people go into the arrangement knowing enough to reasonably consent, whereas Christian finds a naive virgin who doesn't know what a riding crop is and drafts a draconian sex contract. In BDSM relationships, there is a lot more connection, talking, and ritual. The act is considered a scene, and some BDSM scenes do not even involve sex. Now you might be thinking, so what? A book and a film adaptation misrepresent BDSM, big deal, why does it matter? Ignorance has a way of spreading. 50 Shades of Grey in both its forms are wildly popular. The book was read by tens of millions of people, and the movie is astonishingly successful despite its catastrophically poor quality. The misinformation contained, if used as a how-to guide, is dangerous. BDSM requires a lot of trust and safety precautions, for obvious reasons. 50 Shades of Grey knows nothing of this. It does not show the consequences of Christian Grey doing it wrong. It shows Anastasia enjoying his mistake. The writer and director just don't know that it is a mistake. Art does not have to be accurate, but in this case, it should at least be responsible. The author of the novel and the director of the film may have no first-hand experience in BDSM, true, but neither do I, and it only took some research and some common sense to learn the basics. Grant the subject you wish to write about at least the dignity of learning what it is. 50 Shades of Grey has been a boon to the sex toy industry. And that's fine, I'm not here to kink shame anyone. But when the instruction manual is wrong, injuries can occur. And they have. In the BDSM community, 50 Shades of Grey is apparently pretty cringy, usually due to the abusive, unhealthy relationship. Hopefully, the sequel that was just released will fade into obscurity, and we won't have to deal with... Damn it. Hi everyone, if you like what I do, consider clicking on the orange Patreon link below. That's how this show happens. It's also a way for you to request an episode, so check it out.